everyone, and welcome to the Broadway Bound podcast. My name is Kat Hansen, and I'm going to be your host. I'm super excited to get this project started. I've actually wanted to do this a while, so let's get straight into it. So basically this podcast is kind of going to be going over a bunch of the basics of training for musical theater and for a career in musical theater, because over the past few years I have really learned a lot about really how the whole process works. And of course I am still improving and getting better and everything, but I've come a long way, and I do have a lot of experience in the heart of the training. So this episode 1, is going to be all about producing a show from start to finish for actors, meaning basically what's involved throughout the whole process for an actor, just so you know kind of a general overview of how a show is created. So yeah, let's get right on into it. The very first thing about being in a show is finding the audition. That's the first step. There are many ways to find auditions. Obviously, if your school has auditions for their shows, that's great. If you have community theater groups or youth theater groups in your area, personally in San Diego, there are so many theater companies. Just search community theater companies in my area, or youth theater companies in my area. While I'm on that topic, the difference between community and youth theater, they're kind of used interchangeably, but basically all it means is youth theater is just unpaid theater for people under 18. Sometimes youth theater can go up to like 20 years old, but basically under 18. And then community theater usually refers to unpaid theater for everyone, including adults. So that's the main difference between the two. They kind of can be used interchangeably, but yeah, you'll hear me referencing that a little bit. Another way to find auditions is to go on a casting website if you see any notices for open calls. A great casting website to look at for auditions would be Backstage. I know there's a few others, but that's the main one that I know of. You can really filter for everything that you want. You do need a subscription with them to apply to the auditions, but you can still search for auditions without paying. And then, yeah, open calls. If you see anything that see a post or anything that says open call, means anyone is invited to come. You can sign up for it that way. Usually, though, those will be posted on a casting website. And for some Broadway professional companies, you will see on their website that they are accepting auditions. For example, I know Dear Evan Hansen and Hamilton both have sections on their websites where you can apply, just like submit an audition on their website. The chances of you booking a job from that are pretty slim, but always worth a shot if that's one of your favorite shows. I know there are a few that do that, so just look around on their official website, see anything like that. So now that you've signed up for your audition, there are a few different types of auditions. There are in-person auditions and self-tape auditions. This is pretty self-explanatory, but obviously an in-person audition, you would go in somewhere and usually sing or dance or perform a monologue or do sides, which I'll talk about later. And then a self-tape, basically you're just, recording it from your house. And usually auditions would be in person for theater, especially youth theater, but because of COVID, a lot of companies have switched to starting with self-tapes. And I'll go over a bunch of audition stuff in a separate podcast. But so an audition, usually for your first audition, for most theater companies, is you will have to do a song from a musical theater show. Try to pick something that goes with the genre of the show. But again, I'll go into that more detail later. And basically, you would just, if you're going in person, you would go up into the audition room. There's usually an X on the floor. You would go on the X, say your name and a little intro, and then do your song or monologue. And, monologues. You may also have to do a monologue, depending on the show. If it's a play, meaning that it's not primarily based in music, then you probably will have to do a monologue. It all depends. But if it's a musical, you're probably going to have to sing a song. And then for self-tapes, it's usually the same thing, a short portion of a musical theater song or a monologue that you just film yourself and you turn in. Then, callbacks. So callbacks are pretty much always in person. You can have a lot of different things happen at callbacks. Usually you will get some sides sent to you beforehand. A side means it's a portion, like a section of the script that's taken out for you to do. You usually be given it a few days beforehand. If you get called back for something, all a callback means is that they're interested in seeing you in a role. If you do not get a callback for something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't cast in it. Like, I was in a show once where, it was Beauty and the Beast. We were auditioning for Beauty and the Beast. This one girl, she really wanted to be Babette. When the musical, when we call back, she didn't get a callback for Babette. But it turns out she was already cast. So sometimes you don't get a callback, but that doesn't mean that you're not cast in a show. So don't be discouraged. But anyway, back to what happens at a callback. Yeah, usually you're given some sides beforehand, and then you have to read them or sing them. If it's music, the music director will usually go over it a little bit with you at the callback, but not a ton. And then also, if it's a musical, you'll most likely have to do a dance routine. Sometimes you do this at the original audition if it's in person, but it all depends on the theater company. And I'll go more into detail that somewhere else. So, after you've auditioned for the show, and you've done your callback, maybe multiple. Most professional theater companies will have multiple callbacks, especially if it's an open call, meaning anyone's allowed to come. There's a lot more people to sort through for them to find exactly what they're looking for. Once the show is cast, you never want to take casting too seriously. If you don't get a role that you were hoping to get, it doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're untalented. It just means that it wasn't meant to be. Maybe you had too many conflicts. Maybe you just didn't work well with other people that they wanted to cast. There's so many different reasons, and usually it has nothing to do with your talent or anything like that, and that's important to know. But yeah, the cast list is usually either it's emailed to you. Sometimes companies will ask, they will email it to you and they will ask if you're okay with this role, because some people the more professional companies at least will ask if you're okay with doing this role, because sometimes you're doing so many different auditions when you get to a more professional level that you can't always accept everything. Maybe you already got a role. So sometimes you do have to decline roles. I haven't had to do that because I don't audition that much. I'm only doing non-professional theater, which is just my choice right now. So then, after you get the cast list, either emailed to you or it can be posted in person. Sometimes not so much anymore. I haven't really seen that happen a lot, except maybe at a school, but again, because of COVID, a lot of people have leaned towards posting it online. So once the show is cast, then you get to go to rehearsals, which is my favorite part of the process. I love rehearsals more than performing. I do love performing too, but I just love the process of creating a show, which is why I love doing theater so much. So usually at rehearsals, a bunch of things happen, obviously, because you're, putting together a whole show. But at the first rehearsal, you usually do a read-through of the show. Not always, but most of the time, just so that everyone is on the same page about the story. If it's more professional theater, then I don't know. But for most non-professional theater companies, usually do that. And when I refer to professional and non-professional, that just means paid and unpaid. So professional is paid, non-professional is unpaid. That's what I'm referring to there. So yeah. After you do your read-through, depending on the company, usually your director will meet with you and talk about character development, or sometimes they will talk to you about that during rehearsals when you're staging and blocking the show. And I'll get to what that means in a second. So yeah, after you do your read-through and maybe some character development, you're going to move on to creating the show. Usually if you're in a musical, you start with music and dance rehearsals. Music rehearsals, basically, you'll just sit around a piano, you'll learn your harmonies, and, we always record, you should record your harmonies there, and you practice it on your own time. But you'll learn it with the music director. And then dance rehearsals, obviously, the choreographer will teach you the choreography, slowly, kind of an 8 count at a time or something like that, and go over it with the group. And then there are also blocking rehearsals, which is basically what that means, if you're unaware, is just telling you where you stand when you say what line and stuff like that. So that is what I was saying earlier about another time where the director will talk to you about character development or how they want certain lines delivered and stuff like that. So yeah, something I want to talk about really quickly. I know this is just an overview of the whole process, but when it comes to memorizing lines, choreography, and music, that all basically comes down to us as the actor at home and practice. The show is more than just the rehearsals. You need to be putting in a lot more effort outside. And it shows to everyone who's in the room if you haven't been practicing. Obviously, it's a lot more laid back in community theater, but, you never know. Sometimes, I know there's a few companies in San Diego that they're non-professional companies, but they're treated very professionally, so just make sure you know what you're getting into. And yeah, so usually after, you learn the whole show, then you will start to run it in your rehearsal space. Usually in rehearsals, I should say most of the time in rehearsals, you are not practicing on the stage that you're going to be performing on, which may sound really crazy to people who haven't done theater before, but it's just something you get used to. It's not weird. Usually, a dance studio, a park, or, something like that. what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So after you learn everything in your rehearsal space, you will finally start to move into the theater. Usually this is 1 week before you open, or a little less. And basically you'll have a day of tech, which is what we call the week that we move into the theater. You'll have a day of that is called load-in. Some companies refer to it as Super Saturday because you'll go in on Saturday. It's the first time that everything is moved into the theater. Sometimes, sometimes the actors aren't involved in that, but most of the time it is. Load-in usually also refers to when everyone is kind of restaging the show on the sets because you hadn't had any of the sets beforehand. So usually you kind of have to redo some things just to make sure it fits on the stage, because obviously you weren't doing it on the stage and things change. But yeah, so that's load-in, which is, one of my favorite things. I love seeing the theater and the sets for the first time. It's great. Let's see. And it is also a day where someone who's on lighting will usually, try to figure out how they're going to light the show. Because again, they didn't have any practice with this. So what's coming next is Tech Week. This is the week before the show, and this is when not only are the actors moving into the theater, using maybe not every day depending on the company. Oh, I should have said. Usually the week before the show is Tech Week. That means you have rehearsal every day until the show. Usually it's like Monday through Friday, and then you open on Friday and then do weekend shows. Usually that's how it goes. That is as continuing from before. So all the actors moving into the theater, practicing on the sets. You get to do it with costumes, hair and makeup, microphones if you have them. Sometimes you don't, but most of the time, if you have, speaking lines in the show, you will have a mic. And it's a lot of chaos because, one, all the actors are trying to get used to all these million things that are thrown at them. But also the crew, who's like in charge of doing the sound cues for musicals if you don't have a band, which usually you don't, especially in, youth theater. They're working on music cues, lighting, sound, working with the mics. Like, the crew they're not usually involved in the rehearsal process, so they're learning the show in like half the time that you have. You've had months of rehearsals, they have 1 week. So always respect your crew. They work so hard. Crew is so underrated. And yeah, just appreciate them so much. They do so much. But yeah, Tech Week is chaos. And it is tiring because usually you're going for like 5, probably more hours a day for a week. Like, it's a lot. So make sure to bring food, snacks, keep yourself going. Try to find comedic relief with your friends, something like that, because it can get crazy. And also, don't mess with your director that week because they are probably very stressed out and they have a lot to deal with. So be easy on them. They're not trying to be mean to you. It may happen because it's Tech Week and everything's happening at once, but they mean well, I assure you. So after Tech Week, where everything usually gets worse and then better, it is time for the shows. There are a lot of different things that happen at the shows. But usually you get there an hour to 2 hours before the show to get ready. You will do a mic check, which is, basically when they check the sound of your mic, make sure there's no like distortion or anything, if you have mics, obviously. And yeah, a lot of companies have show rituals or, something that you will do before each show, just to get everyone connected. Like sometimes they'll sing a song from the show, or sometimes you'll do like an energy circle. I think that's what that's called. I don't know. It's a thing where like you squeeze hands around the circle, but there's a bunch of different traditions. So usually you'll do a tradition to get everyone ready for the show, and then you just go for it. And opening night is usually not the best, especially in the last 2 shows that I've been in. We didn't really get to run the show really before we performed it, so that's a lot. Usually that doesn't happen. Don't get stressed out about it, but you just kind of learn to go with it and just see what happens. And that's the great thing about theater. You have a few more chances if you don't get it right the first time. You probably won't get it right the first time, and you know what? That's okay. Yeah, so we've made it to the shows. You usually will have a weekend or 2 of shows if you're doing youth theater, and after it comes to a close, it's usually pretty emotional. For me, it depends on the show. I've only had 2 shows that I've really gotten emotional over, just when you have, I hope to have more that I have such a strong bond with, but a lot of people will probably be emotional because this piece of art that you worked on for months is, coming to a close, and everyone puts so much work into it, and just appreciates it that much that, yeah, it's really sad. And one of a show that I did last summer, I've just it's like experiencing a breakup. I say this from no experience because, but it feels like experiencing a breakup where I'm literally so sad and I want to be back there every day. And it's hard when you have a show that you love that much because, you put everything into it, and yeah, but you'll get over it. And you know what? There's always more shows to audition for, and just keep hoping for the next best experience. So, yeah. After the show ends, usually a theater kid tradition is to go to Denny's because they're open. And if you do go to Denny's after your show closes, please tip them a lot because they deal with so much. Especially the people who work at night at Denny's. Please show them appreciation. I feel so bad for them whenever a group of loud theater kids just comes in and storms the Denny's. But yeah. And then sometimes, a few weeks after the show, you'll have a cast party, where you'll kind of celebrate it a little bit more. But once the show closes, you're not quite done yet. Usually you have to help clean up the theater. Usually that happens right after the last show ends, immediately after the show. You gotta clear everything out as fast as possible so you can go to Denny's. But also, because you're not in the space anymore. So you make sure to clean the theater just like you were never there. Please respect all the spaces that you were in. Try not to eat in the audience, even if that theater allows it, which most theaters don't. But just don't try to eat in the audience, just be clean. Don't bring food. Well, you can, but just be really careful and try not to, spill everything everywhere, because it's a shared space usually. Even if it's at your school, it's still not, a lot of people probably also use that space, so just make sure to clean up after yourselves, leave it cleaner than you got there, and yeah. Then, once all of that is done, it's time to look for more auditions and start the whole process over again. So, I hope you enjoyed that quick overview of the whole process for actors in theater. I hope that was helpful to you guys who have never been in a show before and were just curious about, how the whole process works. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment them and let me know. I'm always here to answer questions. I really hope you enjoyed this first episode, and I'll see you later for our next episode. Okay, bye!